So I think before you can make a decision on this, I think there's a lot of stuff in play here that needs to be analyzed. And I think you really need to ask staff, give me the analysis to show me why, within a very desirable neighborhood, we should be writing checks to developers and giving them a whole lot to start developing.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any final comments? Thank you.
This is our attorney, Matt Duffy. He's going to speak, and then I'll speak a little bit.
Good morning, Madam Chair, council members. I think, obviously the appellants have some very strong feelings about the development that's going on, and they can attest to what the feeling and the character and what this will do to the neighborhood and their view of that. I think, from my perspective, what I'll focus on is the record that was developed here to approve this decision. I think the appeal notification that we submitted to the city addresses many of the factors that I think are at issue here today. One of the main factors I think that warrants a little bit more discussion in this regard is a discussion of the unique soil conditions that are involved in this neighborhood. This neighborhood was at one time a backwater to Lake Calhoun. There are some unique soil conditions requiring many of the houses in this area to be put on pilings to provide the adequate foundational support. And as was illustrated, my client's property sits in a slightly higher elevation than the property in question here. And the concern, of course, is settling, subsiding of the foundational supports and the impact they may or may not have on their foundation pilings. The problem is the record just doesn't have that information in it right now. We don't know what would happen. There's been no geotech work done. There's been no seismic work done to figure out whether or not the disturbance in this property would impact that. And that I think that is a major consideration that this commission and the council needs to consider before they approve things like this. This project is unique. I understand the city has done other variants of this kind, the same nature and things like that. This property, the property adjacent to my client's property, is unique in the regard that the soil conditions make it unique. And that has to be looked at in further detail. Of course, the issue here is, your ordinance does provide for that. It's during the permitting stage. We think, during an excavation, consideration of an excavation permit, there has to be this consideration of seismic and geotech issues with regard to the property being developed. I think that needs to be looked at before those decisions are made, because once you grant the variances, once you grant the minor subdivision, that's already been cast, and the project is going to go forward, and the conditions need to be looked at. If the council or this commission is considering that, we would also ask in the alternative that conditions be attached to this approval to make these geotech review. It has to be looked at before they move forward with any development, because we just don't know if excavating this site will cause any problems. The property adjacent to it, the house was built on a much larger lot than average, according to what the city staff has presented to you. There might be a reason why the house is built where it is. There might be a reason why the whole lot wasn't used for the house. The problem is, it just isn't anything in the record that goes to that very issue. So I think, from my client's perspective, to make themselves comfortable, we would need to have conditions attached to this, or at the very least back up and review what the decision was that was made. So that's I think the record in this regard just doesn't have that information, and my client's concerns could be addressed if conditions were attached, or if we backed up and said, yeah, maybe we need to look at this a little deeper. So I appreciate it. I will answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Any questions? Seeing none, move along.
Hello, my name is Karen Mayer. I'm Joe Yoss's wife. I live at that address also, the one that's adjacent to this property. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the major concerns that we have regarding this minor subdivision and two variances. First of all, at the last meeting, this meeting, staff stated that basically, of course you're going to do this minor subdivision because it was originally plotted like that. Well, that original plot was done over 100 years ago, you guys, when small cottages were put on there. And cottages, if you can recall, are like little 2-bedroom cottages, not a 2,500 square foot home, 2 homes that they're proposing. So to go back to what the original plotting, as your staff have said that, of course, we're going to do this, doesn't make sense. When it was zoned to R1, that should be all in the past. It would be like saying, oh, well, we can't do curbs or paved roads or cables anymore for electricity because that wasn't in the original plan 100 years ago. So I think that should be totally taken off the table. Allowing this lot to be split Basically, the setback requirement is 5 feet from the home to the property line. We have about 3 feet 6 inches. Our house was built in 1950, so we're the second owners. We had nothing to do with that. That was allowed. But Joe, would you come up here? I want to show you what 8.5 feet look like. This is 8.5 feet. That end and this end. There will be a house there, and there will be a house here. That's a house. This is our house. That is not even the 10 feet that is required. And I've done the math. You can easily do the math based on the 2,500 square feet that they're suggesting. And I know, and you know, that they will have to get up to that 5 feet requirement to get 2,500 two houses on that lot. The also thing the staff said that she kept referring to that, well, the standard size is 5,000 feet. Zone R1 is 6,000 square feet. She suggested that there was a variety of plot sizes. Actually, they're not. If you look at that map, there are not that many sizes. And these two plots will be the second and third smallest lots in the area. We're also very concerned with the stability of the land. As our attorney said, and we've consulted with construction engineers, and if you drive in our neighborhood, you know that yards have sunk, that houses have had to rebuild their foundations and hold it up. And it's because this was built on wetlands. Lake Calhoun used to go all the way to 44th. We are on 40th. So the ground is incredibly unstable. It's fluid, and that's movement of soil without any disturbance. They come and do this, they're going to really disturb the property. We also, our house is on pilings. There's 18 inches between our home and the soil. They were out there yesterday doing soil bore testing. The machine was right next to our property line. I'm concerned already that there's damage. They bored in there. They are actually would have to go over our property line to do some of the work that they have to do when you have to build a foundation. So again, we're very, very concerned about, and we know there is going to be damage to our property and our structure of our home. We really believe that, from what we're presenting here, that minor subdivision should be null and void and not held up, and therefore the other two variances should be invalid. However, if these approvals continue, we want you to put conditions on the variances, that an additional setback from our home be put in there so that at least minimally we have 10 feet between our house and their house. That is what should be, I mean, just looking at what I showed you should be there. We should expect zero movement of any of the soils on our property. We want seismic monitoring to be done and set up before any start of construction. We'd like to see the whole engineered soil retention plan before they start any demolition and construction, because demolition by bringing those big machines on the ground property will already start impacting our home. We want to pick a soil engineer firm of our choice, and the owners of that property will pay for all these things. We also want to incur no cost to ourselves for the testing, and we will not incur any damages to our property from the construction at all. As I said, at the Planning Commission, one of the members did suggest that the developers look into some of these things, but there's no requirement that they do. They can take that suggestion and just go away with it. The other points I do want to bring up is that you guys have, the city of Minneapolis has competing initiatives. Through this variance process that we've gone through.
I'm going to ask that we finalize this item as we have a very full agenda. So just a few more seconds here on the final thoughts, and then we'll have to ask staff to respond to the many questions that have been raised through the testimony.
All right. But you do have variant based on your reduce, recycle, livable communities. These new houses don't even have yards where people can play. You're all about activity and healthy living and home gardening. You can't even have a home garden on some of these. You're also very concerned with water quality, as our attorney said, that there is going to be an impact on runoff. So I reviewed with you what our minimum ask is, what we are wanting. If you continue to put our property at risk by moving forward on this, we will take further action. And that's how I'm going to leave it. Do you have any questions?
That's fine. Is there any question for the appellant? There is none. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Okay. Let's come on up, and we'll have the 2-minute timer for each of the additional public speakers.
After him, can I say one more thing then, after he presents?
No.
Okay,
We're going to
I
have
have one
to
more thing to ask you then. So at the end of this meeting, because through this process, we are very surprised at how these meetings go. Are you going to vote on this as a yes? Are you going to put conditions on it? Are you going to push it to another meeting so further investigation can happen? Because the analysis from staff they did not do any further analysis from when we did our original to the appeal. So what will you be
So I think
doing?
part of the issue is that this is simply a subdivision request. It is not an approval of the new buildings that would go here, which is a separate process. So once we get done with the public hearing, I'll be able to ask staff to clarify and respond to the many questions that were raised about the new buildings and soil conditions and construction, which is very common questions about all new construction in the neighborhood. But I do want to make sure that the other folks have a chance to speak. The Zoning and Planning Committee is the committee where appeals are held and public hearings are held after the Planning Commission appeal comes through. The final vote will happen at the City Council meeting this cycle. And that is the final decision of the City of Minneapolis. So
you're not going to vote on it today?
we vote on it as a committee
But
today,
then
yes.
it goes to the City Council?
That's correct. And staff is here to answer any of these kind of clarifying questions. We have the next two speakers come on up, and then we do have the final two items on our agenda after this, including a very long public hearing I'm expecting next.
Hello, my name is Constance Pepin, 4031 Zenith Avenue South, and I'm told that I can speak to this appeal without affecting the original reason I came to the meeting, which is for item number 3 on the agenda. I want to say I'm very sorry that I didn't know in advance about this item on the agenda, or I would have prepared more. I just felt I had to come up and support the appeal because so much of this is happening in our neighborhood. I couldn't believe to hear this and that it wasn't better known in the neighborhood. And a couple of points that were made about protecting existing properties. This is happening all over the neighborhood. Linden Hills was really a big water land at one time. The soils are very unstable. The water level, all the time it happens that when they finally get down to excavating, there's flooding, there's damage to adjacent properties. The stormwater is not properly managed. And it's not just a question of managing construction. It's really please stop allowing developers and putting developers in charge of what's happening in our neighborhood. The environmental impacts are maybe not clear now, but they will be very soon. The loss of trees, all the trees that come down to build these monster houses with minimal setbacks. And I'd like to say that unfortunately, the way it's set up is the developer will come back and ask for minimum setbacks and a variance for even fewer setbacks. I hate to say this, but maybe there won't even be the 8.5 feet that they measured out. That's how bad it has gotten to be, where all these variances get approved. The loss of trees, the hydrology in the area, the environmental impacts that no one is even talking about, or some people are talking about them, but the city's not listening. And I really urge you to grant this appeal and make the developer think twice about the damage that they are doing and listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pepin. Final speaker? Welcome. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Chris Strom. I'm the architect, and I'm with Nick Smaby, the builder, and Golem Kian, the owner's rep. So I'll keep it brief. I want to thank you, the council, for the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about our project. Just a little context. I lived in Cottage City for 9 years. I currently live in Fulton. Nick, the builder, he is president of Choice Wood Company. Nick grew up a few blocks from here. He went to Southwest High School. Choice Wood was National Builder of the Year in 2006. Their work is featured in the Not So Big House. I happen to, part of my business is to specialize in small accessory dwelling units. We very much care about the neighborhood, and in fact, we think it's a really, really good thing for the neighborhood. Just speaking to the geotech question about the soil, the geotech soil test was done yesterday, and we're obviously going to build appropriately for the soil conditions. We're seeking to subdivide the property at 3006 West 40th Street. It is just under 10,000 square feet. We received unanimous approval from the Planning Commission on February 6th, and frankly, we were pretty surprised that this approval would be appealed. Um, the So it's located in Cottage City. It was already said that it was platted with unusually small lot sizes. And the intention back in the day was to entice middle-class families to be able to live by Lake Calhoun. The highlighted lots on this map are all narrower than 40 feet wide. And it's pretty clear to us that our two lots would fit right into the neighborhood as shown in the darker orange. A very similar proposal was approved in 2015 on nearby Thomas Avenue. Their lot is a little smaller than ours, but they were granted permission for the split. There's now a single-family house on what is now 3933 Thomas and another single-family house at what is 3935 Thomas. Another proposal was approved in 2015 on Vincent Avenue. There's now a single-family house at what is now 3905 Vincent and another single-family house at 3907. So we think this proposal is good for the neighborhood. And I think we can agree that smaller houses are preferable to monster houses. The Linden Hills Neighborhood Council also thought our proposal was good for the neighborhood and wrote us a letter of support, which is not necessarily common for Linden Hills. We heard a lot from Mr. Uhas and Ms. Mayer about the effect on the neighborhood, but I think most of their comments really were about the effect on their particular property. And one of the reasons that the potential houses are going to be close is because their own house is non-conforming and is over the setback on their property. This is the property survey. Their property is the one to the right in the yellow area, and the white area represents our property. And we kind of need to address the elephant in the room in that the red area is a retaining wall that Mr. Uhas and Ms. Mayer built at least 3 feet into our property, and that exists. They also built a deck over the property line by 1 foot. And the reason we bring this up is it's just hard to take an appeal seriously about respecting property lines because this is really about a lot subdivision and not what we're actually going to build there, because they already have elements of their own property that are non-conforming. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Are there any questions for the applicant? There are none. Would anyone else like to speak who hasn't spoken? Ms. Romanishin, we have quite a long meeting here, so hopefully be brief.
Sarah Lynn Romanishin, the Wedge neighborhood. I didn't plan on testifying on this item, but I do believe it to be necessary. I also, just as a note, I also wish that the agenda had been posted earlier. Some of this was...
The clerk's office has a new
prepared.
rule of posting agendas 24 hours in advance of all meetings.
Thank you. Actually, that's good to know. I support the appeal by Karen Meyer and Joseph Uhas. The frustration is very real in the residents of this city, and as that is seen by their testimony. It is time to listen to our residents and address real livability and environmental issues that are happening. Please support the appeal, and just as a note, the small houses that this gentleman was referring to were originally meant to be cabins or summer homes. They were not meant to be middle-class year-round homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak who hasn't spoken? Anyone else? Last call. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. In order to keep going, we gave significantly more time to both the appellants and the folks who came to speak. So I just want to have staff clarify some of the questions. We did see the surrounding maps. There are 31 properties in the staff report that are shown to be under the 6,000 square feet. Maybe Ms. Weidmeyer, you could put that up from the staff report as well as answer the questions about the approval process for the new buildings, including any variances that those would need from the new regulations that this council approved around R1 homes, as well as the soil conditions and some of the questions that were raised about the construction impacts, which again, I know are very common concerns with all of the construction happening in this neighborhood.
Yeah, so here's the diagram showing lot sizes within 350 feet of the site. So it's not showing or reflecting the lot widths, but that was, 30% of these properties are also only or less than 50 feet in width, and then 41% are less than 6,000 square feet in area. Looking at the zoning code reviews requirements that they'll be subject to, of course, will be they'll have a maximum impervious surface requirement. They'll have setback requirements. They'll have to adhere to those. If they don't, a variance would be needed, but they'd have to demonstrate that they can meet all three findings to grant those variances. And at this time, we haven't identified that there would be any need for variances. Looking at the construction process, there are things in place to address impacts to surrounding properties. In order to, in addition to like meeting the zoning code requirements, they also have to meet building code requirements, which would address soil conditions, making sure that they're constructing the new building for those soil conditions, but they'd also have to enter into a construction agreement. And part of that is addressing impacts to adjacent properties. So that is actually required. They have to submit a signed document addressing how they're going to meet all the standards that have been established before they can get that building permit. Is there anything I missed?
Are there any further questions for staff? And then Mr. Wittenberg had a.
Chair Bender, committee members, just to follow up on a couple of things that Ms. Whitmire noted. She referenced the construction management agreement, which covers a wide range of issues, and it would address both the demolition and new construction, specifically to address the sort of geotechnical related issues. There are more specific standards now in place than there had been several years ago about retaining a separation between a basement and the water table. The city is much more careful about that now, as well as during the construction process. When the excavation takes place, there is much more substantial shoring required to ensure stabilization of the property when it has been excavated, and you don't have sort of collapsing walls adjacent to other properties.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad you have this map up. I don't think it shows overwhelmingly that there are smaller lots. It shows that it's about half and half. And if you go out about one more block, you can see there's more bigger lots than smaller lots. So I'm interested in your analysis with regard to the hardship or practical difficulty. I think it's a stretch to suggest that something that was platted 100 years ago creates a practical difficulty. They can build one house on that lot. Therefore, there is an alternative. So I'm confused. This is just a question of density. Do we either want more density or we don't? And so I'm interested in how we strictly define this issue of practical difficulty. They can build something on that lot, and it will be bigger. They'll be able to build whatever they can on a lot of that size. But if they're going to subdivide the lot, you're going to have two large houses, not two small cottages as plotted 100 years ago, right? So how is your analysis with regard to practical difficulty anything other than economic?
Chair Bender, Councilmember Goodman, that was part of the analysis, the existing underlying platting lots, and they do create a variety of sizes, but also just looking at the lot size that exists there currently, you can build a much larger house, which would be a large house would be very out of character for this area. So that was another consideration.
Ms. Willing, aren't two large houses out of character for the neighborhood? I mean, essentially what you're saying is one large house would be out of character, but two 2,500 square foot houses would be out of character also. So it's just an economic question, right?
I'll just note that number was not given by the applicant. That was a number given by the appellant. So we don't have a proposal in front of us for homes. Is that correct?
That's correct. We don't have any development plans in front of us. So they're just subject to what is allowed by the zoning ordinance.
So what would be allowed under the code is a house up to 2,500 square feet, correct?
That's correct.
I would love to hear the applicants tell us what size home they're suggesting, given that they're allowed to have 2,500 square feet. And since they're here, maybe they can comment on that.
Does staff have information, or would we like to hear from the applicant? That's fine.
I can guarantee it's not going to be 1,200 square feet. So, I mean, it's either one big house or two big houses. So how does it become anything other than economic? If your argument is this was platted for all these small lots, therefore that's the practical difficulty, then how does it become anything other than economic, one big house, two big houses? Great. If the chair will allow, sorry.
So why don't we have the applicant come up and answer that question? Perhaps Mr. Wittenberg could also remind us, what are the rules that we adopted that Councilmember Palmisano authored to sort of control for the size of buildings as well.
Thanks. Just to clarify, so it's pretty subjective what a large or small house is. We could, if without subdividing the lot, we could build a house that is about 62 feet wide, which is grossly out of context with the area, and really we're not really interested in doing. If we do subdivide the lot, by code, the largest we can build over 2 floors is 2,500 square feet. That means it's a maximum 1,250 square foot footprint. I lived in a small cottage in Cottage City, and we had a 840 square foot footprint, and it's not giant, and 1,250 is really not, I wouldn't consider it a big house at all. So that's the largest that can be built as a footprint on this property.
But as a total amount of FAR, you could build 2,500 square feet. Are you arguing that that's not a large house?
Not in today's context. No, I'm not. No.
Okay, well, that's...
It's about average for new home construction.
Okay, are there any further questions for staff?
I'm sorry. We're done with that piece of it. I have another
Councilmember
question for
Goodman.
staff. Mr. Wittenberg, so you stated that before a building permit, or Ms. Holeen suggested that before a building permit is issued, there's a signed document to assure that there aren't going to be any construction defects or damages. Yet it's been my experience in my ward that once they get the building permit, all sorts of damage occurs, and then we call it a private cause of action between 2 property owners. And I can give you a dozen examples in my ward of houses built right in my own neighborhood in Bryn Mawr where they get the building permit and then there are cracks in the houses next door, soft soils. We could talk about Vincent's, Washburn, and such. So what kind of assurances do these folks have other than a private cause of action that our issuing a building permit won't result in any damage? I mean, that doesn't sound like any reassurance at all. It just sounds like we're going to have 2 lawyers fighting it out later if they can afford it.
Chair Bender, Councilmember Goodman, the construction management agreement addresses a wide range of construction management issues. It doesn't assure an adjacent property owner that there won't be damage during construction. We simply can't do that. There are a variety of measures that have been taken to minimize the potential for that kind of damage, such as the increased shoring requirements. And from my experience, it's been quite rare that, especially since the construction management agreement has gone in place, that construction has negatively affected adjacent properties directly through some sort of damage. You're correct that if damage does take place, that is largely a private matter between those 2 property owners.
Okay, well, thank you. I just don't want to leave out there the idea that this construction management agreement, which Councilmember Palmisano so ably made happen, gives any protection at all for any damage from a house that's being built within 8 feet, 4 feet, or 12 feet from any other house, because it doesn't. And our own inspectors are very limited in terms of what they can do when someone does see damage. I've been through the process with inspections many times in my own neighborhood.
Okay. Is there any further questions for staff? Is there a motion? Is there a motion on this item? Councilmember Goodman moved to deny it.
Sure, I'm going to move to grant the appeal. I don't think I'm going to win this one, but I guess I'll make this argument. I don't think a practical difficulty has been established. It's pretty simple. That's the standard, is practical difficulty. And I think they can buy this lot and build a house, and therefore there's no practical difficulty problem. This is a question about density. And let's just admit that's what it's about. In a very nice neighborhood, more people want to live there, and this isn't like building affordable housing. We're not putting up 2 1,200 square foot houses. We're talking about 2 2,400 square foot houses, and the neighborhood association, the planning commission, and the council members perhaps want to side on the side of density, and that is a legitimate place to be. But I look at whether or not there's a practical difficulty, and I don't see a practical difficulty to building one house on one lot. Therefore, I'm moving to grant the appeal.
Mr. Nielsen, did you have a clarification about staff's findings?
I did, Chair Bender and Councilmember Goodman, just on the motion, the standard for a variance is not that they can't build anything, or that there is an alternative. Some would argue that a very large house area isn't a reasonable alternative, but that there is an alternative. That is not the standard. That was the standard under the change in law several years ago that we dealt with in the variance standards, and the current law does not state that. The fact that there is an alternative does not preclude the variance request. The standard is simply, is what they request reasonable at this point? And again, the new construction is not an issue.